Imagine, like a small wedge-shaped piece of fiberglass just flying through the night sky.
Right, usually packed with pretty cheap commercial electronics.
Exactly. And it costs maybe $20,000 to assemble. You
Yeah.
can practically launch the thing from the back of a pickup truck.
Yeah, on its own, it really doesn't look like much.
It doesn't. But when that piece of fiberglass crashes into a highly sensitive $300 million early warning radar system in the Middle East, it does a lot more than just break some equipment.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the sources we are looking at today suggest that an impact like that is, well, it's the physical mechanism that could drag the U.S., Israel, Iran, Russia, and China into a conflict that could literally freeze your bank account tomorrow.
Yeah, that asymmetrical cost exchange.
Yeah.
A cheap drone crippling a massive military asset, that is the defining feature of modern warfare right now.
It really is. Welcome to the day's deep dive, everyone. We are examining this incredibly complex, escalating war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
And trying to understand how it acts as a potential tripwire for World War III.
Right, and our stack of sources today is just massive. We're pulling from frontline documentaries, in-depth interviews with military strategists like John Spencer, plus some really comprehensive geopolitical risk analyses.
And some rare on-the-ground reporting coming directly out of Tehran, too.
Yeah, which is fascinating. So my goal here is to break these rivalries down into plain English for you. We want to see how a drone strike thousands of miles away connects directly to your personal savings, the cost of your groceries, your everyday life.
And I think it's important to state right up front, because we are dealing with highly charged intelligence and political documents from multiple rival nations, our objective here is pure synthesis.
Right. We're not taking sides here.
Exactly. We are not endorsing any left-wing or right-wing government stance. The focus is strictly on unpacking the factual history and the strategies laid out in these original materials.
So you have a clear picture of how this global crisis actually operates under the surface. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the missiles flying today, we really have to look backward first, right?
Yeah, you have to look at the invisible economic architecture that basically holds the modern world together.
Right. The foundation of this whole tension requires going back to, 1953?
Right, 1953, yeah.
At the time, Iran's prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, made this really controversial move to nationalize Iran's oil reserves.
Which, his logic was pretty simple, right? He just wanted the wealth from Iranian oil to stay in Iran.
Exactly. Instead of being controlled by Western petroleum companies. But the response from the West was swift. U.S. and British intelligence agencies basically orchestrated Operation AGAX.
Right, overthrowing Mossadegh.
Yeah, and that single event cemented this profound institutional mistrust between the Iranian regime and Western powers, and that still dictates policy today.
But the sources show that the real structural shift in the global economy, the one that really sets the stage for today, happened a couple of decades later, right around 1971. Right, the Nixon shock. Up until 1971, the U.S. dollar was tied directly to physical gold.
You could theoretically just exchange dollars for gold at a fixed rate.
Exactly. But when President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, the currency was suddenly floating. It wasn't backed by a physical asset anymore.
Which is a huge threat to the dollar being the world's reserve currency.
It was a massive threat. So to maintain global demand for the dollar, the U.S. needed a new anchor. And by 1974, they established what we now call the petrodollar system.
Okay, so break that down for us.
Well, the U.S. approached Saudi Arabia and the broader OPEC nations with a deal. The Gulf states would sell their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. And in exchange, the U.S. military would guarantee their security against any regional threats.
It functions almost like a mandatory global gift card.
That's a great way to put it.
Like if any country wants to buy oil, which is, the most essential commodity for a modern economy, they're forced to acquire U.S. dollars first.
Right. Every nation needs oil, so every nation needs to hold vast reserves of U.S. dollars. And that constant built-in demand is basically what props up American economic dominance.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. If the ultimate prize here is just maintaining that oil currency system, why is the geopolitical news cycle completely dominated by Iran's uranium enrichment?
No.
Like, why the hyper-focus on the nuclear program?
Well, you have to look at how a nuclear umbrella changes the psychology of the region. The petrodollar relies entirely on Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states trusting that American security guarantee.
Okay.
If Iran successfully develops a nuclear weapon, the conventional military protection the U.S. provides suddenly looks pretty inadequate.
Ah, because a nuclear-armed neighbor just completely alters the balance of power.
Exactly. If the Gulf countries no longer believe the U.S. can protect them from a nuclear Iran, their incentive to sell oil exclusively in dollars just evaporates.
Wow. And if they abandon the dollar requirement for oil trades, the global demand for the U.S. dollar plummets.
And American economic hegemony fractures with it.
So the stakes of a nuclear Iran are existentially high for both the U.S. and Israel.
Absolutely.
And because of that, the military responses we're reading about in these sources, they've evolved way beyond traditional warfare. We're seeing tactics that are just unprecedented.
Yeah, the documents describe these recent, highly coordinated decapitation strikes by the U.S. and Israel, and these were not standard bombing runs.
Right. They successfully eliminated Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Who, the sources note, has now been replaced by his son, Khamenei.
Right. But the strikes essentially crippled the top-level command structure of the Iranian military in just a matter of hours. The analysts in our sources call this a neurological strike.
It's a highly specific term. In standard warfare, you target the muscles of an enemy, right? Their tanks, their infantry.
But a neurological strike targets the central nervous system.
Exactly. You are attempting to sever the brain of the military from its body before it can even coordinate a response.
Which is the identical tactical doctrine that led to the collapse of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the sudden fall of the Syrian regime in late 2024.
Yeah, you eliminate the core decision makers, and the fighting force just fragments into disorganized units.
So they basically snip the synapses. But here's the major disconnect I'm seeing. The regime in Iran hasn't folded the way Hezbollah or Syria did.
Right.
They are still launching massive retaliatory attacks. Why didn't the whole system just collapse?
Well, from a strategic perspective, the Iranian military doctrine was explicitly designed to survive this exact scenario.
Really?
Yeah. Their strategy over the last few decades is rooted in radical decentralization. They've built these elaborate missile cities hidden deep inside mountain ranges.
Wow, like fully underground bases.
Fully equipped with internal railway systems to move munitions without ever seeing daylight. Their goal isn't to win a conventional war against the U.S. because they know that's impossible.
Right, you can't beat the U.S. head on.
So their doctrine is just survival. Outlast the opponent by spreading the pain globally.
Which brings us back to those cheap drones we talked about at the beginning. That is asymmetric warfare in action.
Absolutely. They know they can't compete with fifth-generation stealth fighters, so they use cheap naval and aerial drone swarms to overwhelm advanced technology.
And the math there heavily favors the aggressor, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. If Iran launches a swarm of drones that cost $20,000 each, and the U.S. has to use $2 million Patriot interceptor missiles to shoot them down.
Iran is effectively bleeding the U.S. military budget dry, even if the drums miss.
Exactly. Plus, sheer volume can just overwhelm the targeting algorithms of traditional defenses.
Yeah, the sources detail instances of these cheap drones successfully destroying those $300 million radar systems.
And actively targeting carrier strike groups like the USS Abraham Lincoln. It turns the economics of a superpower into a vulnerability.
And that strategy of spreading the pain, that's where this stops being an abstract geopolitical chess match and starts actively threatening the listener's wallet.
Yeah, the physical manifestation of that pain is the Strait of Hormuz.
It's a maritime choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, right?
Very narrow. At its narrowest point, it's only 33 kilometers wide. And depending on global demand, roughly 20% to 60% of the world's traded oil physically passes through that tiny stretch of water.
And the Iranian coastline borders the entire northern edge of that strait. So they have total geographic leverage.
Total leverage. And what's crucial to understand is the mechanism of a blockade here. Iran doesn't need to physically sink every single oil tanker trying to cross.
They just need to hit one or two.
Exactly. The moment that happens, global maritime insurance companies completely panic. They'll either freeze their coverage entirely or raise premiums to astronomical levels.
And shipping companies just refuse to enter the strait without affordable insurance. So the oil stops flowing without a full military blockade.
Right. And you combine this with the actions of Iran's Houthi allies who are compromising commercial transit in the Red Sea right now.
Which freezes another 8% to 9% of global supply.
It's massive.
The economic modeling in our sources projects the immediate fallout of that. They say the global price of oil could rapidly skyrocket to $200 a barrel.
Which is devastating. And we can actually look at the on-the-ground reality in Iran right now as a preview of that kind of economic distress.
Yeah, the local reporting is staggering. We're talking about an inflation rate sitting between 60% and 70%.
The cost of a basic staple like a loaf of bread has tripled. It costs the equivalent of $35.
$35 for bread. And the economy is shedding jobs massively. Plus, the government imposed a near-total digital blackout just to control information.
But the reporters also highlight this deeply human element, the lipstick effect.
Right, where locals intentionally seek out small, affordable luxuries like gathering at cafes just to maintain their sanity while their currency collapses.
The juxtaposition between top-level military strategy and the sheer exhaustion of everyday citizens just trying to buy bread is profound.
It really is. But I want to translate that $200 barrel of oil to the listener's life. Because I don't buy crude oil by the barrel, right? If the Strait of Hormuz effectively closes, how does this actually hit my personal bank account?
Well, it operates as an aggressive, cascading supply chain shock. A sudden spike to $200 a barrel instantly doubles or triples the cost of diesel fuel.
And modern civilization runs entirely on diesel logistics.
Completely. The moment trucking and shipping costs explode, the cost to transport every single consumer good skyrockets.
The produce at the grocery store, the clothes you buy online, building materials.
Yeah, the final retail price surges just to absorb those new transportation costs, and that triggers a massive, sudden wave of inflation across the entire economy.
And because this inflation is driven by a physical supply shortage, central banks can't just adjust interest rates or print money to fix it, can they?
Not at all. They are completely powerless against a physical supply bottleneck. So when uncontrollable inflation hits, corporate profit margins collapse and the global stock markets go into a severe tailspin.
Institutional investors and individuals just panic. They pull their capital out of equities and flee to physical cash.
The old adage that cash is king during a crisis.
Yeah. And this rapid market contraction directly threatens the value of your personal retirement accounts, your 401ks, pension funds. It just leads to international economic paralysis.
And when that kind of economic pressure hits a desperate regime, the sources indicate the conflict moves away from standard military bases. They start looking at unconventional targets.
Right, to force the world's hand. We see explicit threats in the material about asymmetric retaliation, like Iranian military forces openly discussing using drone swarms to destroy local desalination plants in allied Gulf nations.
Which is terrifying. To quantify that threat, those desalination plants provide roughly 60% of the drinking water for those surrounding countries.
And the sources also mention the very real possibility of targeting submarine internet cables.
Yeah.
But wait, hold on. Attacking civilian water supplies and deep-sea internet cables feels like an incredible escalation from just exchanging missile fire with military bases. Is this an actual operational strategy, or are we just looking at theoretical doomsday modeling from analysts?
No, the analysts view it as a highly probable trajectory if the situation reaches a specific threshold.
Okay, explain that.
Think about the strategic logic of a cornered state. If the U.S. and Israel successfully cut off all remaining Iranian revenue streams, say, by seizing or destroying the Karg Island oil terminal, which processes most of their crude exports, the regime has zero traditional leverage left.
They have absolutely nothing to lose.
Right. So to force the international community to step in and stop the U.S. coalition, they have to threaten the underlying infrastructure of modern society.
Wow. And destroying a desalination plant creates an immediate catastrophic water crisis that takes years to rebuild.
And severing submarine cables doesn't just disrupt civilian internet access. Those cables carry the SWIFT banking network's data, cloud infrastructure, global communications.
So severing them halts global financial markets instantaneously.
Instantly.
So while the Middle East is fundamentally destabilized, and the global economy is teetering on the edge of this massive inflationary crisis, other global superpowers are watching closely.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources make it clear that Russia and China are not just passive observers here, they are actively cashing in on the chaos.
The shifting dynamics on the global chessboard are really fascinating. From Putin's perspective, he actively benefits from every degree of tension in the Middle East.
Because any threat to the Strait of Hormuz drives up the global price of oil.
Exactly. And since Russia is a massive exporter of crude, those skyrocketing prices instantly repair their budget deficits. It provides a direct financial windfall that funds their ongoing military operations in Ukraine.
But China's position, according to the documents, is a much more delicate balancing act.
It is. China's massive manufacturing economy relies on the Strait of Hormuz for roughly 40% of its energy imports.
So fundamentally, Beijing despises high oil prices because it slows down their economic growth.
Yeah. Right. However, Beijing's geopolitical calculations override their immediate economic discomfort. China desperately needs the current Iranian regime to remain in power.
Because Iran acts as a strategic counterweight to American influence in the region.
Yes, if the Islamic Republic were to collapse, any replacement government formed in the aftermath would almost certainly be heavily influenced by the West.
Which is a pro-U.S., anti-China state sitting right on their critical trade routes.
Exactly. So the result of that calculus is that Russia and China are actively supplying Iran with advanced weaponry, satellite data, and backdoor financial support.
They are explicitly doing this to bog the United States down in an endless, expensive quagmire. It's like we're looking at a bizarrely inverted Cold War dynamic.
Yeah, in this scenario, the U.S. is playing the role of the proxy force getting trapped in a grinding conflict, and China acts as the detached superpower just watching us bleed resources.
But surely the leadership in Beijing understands that if the global economy crashes due to a supply chain breakdown, their export-driven economy goes down with it, right?
The analysts point out that this is a calculated, long-term strategic risk. Beijing and Moscow are focusing on this concept of military capital.
Okay.
The defense manufacturing base of the U.S. is not infinite. Every sophisticated interceptor missile fired in the Middle East, every aircraft carrier deployed to the Persian Gulf, it represents a massive drain on U.S. readiness.
Oh, I see. The more resources the U.S. commits to containing Iran, the less capability they have to project power in the Pacific.
Like regarding the defense of Taiwan, or in Eastern Europe. For Russia and China, and during temporary economic instability, is a price they are totally willing to pay if it means permanently depleting American military supremacy.
Which brings us to the ultimate overriding question of this whole deep dive. With the U.S., Israel, Iran, Russia, and China all deeply entangled, and critical civilian infrastructure in the crosshairs, are we actually witnessing the opening stages of World War III?
Well,
And if we are, how do the military strategists see this playing out?
the projections outline a very precarious path. The primary danger is that these continuous proxy skirmishes eventually erode the remaining back channels of diplomacy entirely.
So diplomacy just completely breaks down.
Yeah. If Israel reaches a point where they believe they must launch a massive preemptive strike to physically destroy Iran's nuclear facilities.
Or if Iran successfully crosses the threshold and weaponizes enriched uranium soon.
Then the situation forces a direct, total war. And that scenario would almost certainly require American boots on the ground to stabilize the region.
Which in turn would provoke direct military or financial intervention from Russia and China to protect their interests.
Exactly.
And the sources are brutally clear about what the day after looks like in that scenario. If the U.S. and Israel use overwhelming force to completely topple the Iranian government, it doesn't just magically result in a neat, orderly transition to a pro-Western democracy.
Not at all. The historical precedents cited in the intelligence reports are grim. The analysis indicates a forced regime collapse in Iran would likely result in a fractured, failed state.
Very similar to the current conditions in Libya or Sudan.
Right. The central authority would disintegrate, leaving well-armed factions fighting for control over the country's resources and hidden military caches.
Triggering a massive regional fallout, unprecedented refugee crises spreading into Europe, and basically guaranteeing decades of violent instability across the entire Middle East.
Yes. So, to avoid that nightmare scenario, the strategists in our materials advocate for what they call a soft landing.
The perfect solution, essentially.
Basically, a soft landing requires a fundamental paradigm shift away from the decades-old policy of maximum pressure or pure military containment.
Okay.
It requires diplomatic recognition of the core survival needs of both sides. The immediate goal is implementing a durable ceasefire, and that requires highly unconventional negotiations.
And the sources note this is actively being attempted, right? For instance, there are details about J.D. Vance attempting to mediate and open back channels using intermediaries via Pakistan.
Yeah, the strategy is to secure smaller, pragmatic, mutually beneficial deals that de-escalate the immediate kinetic threat, rather than holding out for a total ideological victory.
Wait, so the grand strategic solution to prevent a global breakdown is simply to accept that a heavily armed, deeply adversarial regime remains in power just to protect the stock market and the supply chain.
Well, in the realm of real-world geopolitical strategy, institutional survival often has to take precedence over total victory.
Really?
Yeah, the soft landing approach isn't about ignoring the very real threats that Iran poses. It's a calculated realization that an absolute military victory is physically impossible without simultaneously destroying the global economic system and sparking a wider world war.
So in complex systems, sometimes the only winning move is just achieving stabilization.
Exactly.
Wow, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by tracing the invisible architecture of the petrodollar back to the 1970s and the gold standard.
Yeah, we did.
We explored how a $20,000 drone swarm can fundamentally alter the balance of power. We mapped how a disruption in the Strait of Hormuz cascades into $200 oil, catastrophic inflation, and drained retirement accounts.
And pulled back the curtain on how Russia and China are utilizing this conflict to intentionally bleed American military capital dry.
Right. But before we finish, I want you to leave a listener with one final thought to consider. Something drawn from a very specific thread in our financial sources today.
Yeah, consider the new settlement mechanisms being aggressively developed by the BRICS nations right now. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
They are actively building an alternative financial system.
They are. And the sources explicitly note that this system is being partially backed by physical commodities. They even reference 161 tons of gold recently integrated from Venezuela.
Which is huge.
So think about this. If the US dollar is permanently crippled by a prolonged, unmanageable inflationary crisis stemming from a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz,
Could this specific Middle Eastern conflict act as the exact catalyst that finally provides a rival global currency the opening it needs to dethrone the US dollar forever?
it's a real possibility.
It all comes back to how interconnected the system is. A cheap drone hits a radar, an insurance premium spikes, a shipping lane closes, and the currency that runs the world starts to crack. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the underlying mechanics of the bigger picture, and we'll see you next time.